bi-weekly seminar series. Just so everyone's aware, we are recording the session today. We do have a YouTube playlist where we are keeping all of the recordings of the seminar. So if you've missed out on anything in the past sessions, then you're welcome to catch up there. I'll drop the link into the chat after we get started today. If you're not comfortable with being recorded, then please do keep your camera off and keep any comments and questions you may have in the chat, and we can read them out. So for anyone that's not attended these sessions before, then these happen every fortnight. It is a chance to come together as a community, the MECS family, and to share experiences with designing and implementing different methodologies for trying to understand the different contexts in which modern energy does or does not fit into the kitchens of the Global South. So our session today, we have a presentation from Serena Saligari. I've probably butchered your surname there, so apologies. Serena has been working with the University of Liverpool and is going to present to us today some research that she did here in Kenya, out in Eldoret, understanding the hopes and fears that people have in a gas bottle and hopefully distilling for us the message in the bottle itself. So before I hand over to Serena, I'd just like to remind everyone, as we go through the presentation, please do get your thoughts down, any reflections, any comments, any questions into the chat. We can pick them up at the end where we'll have a discussion session. So without further ado, I think I'll hand over to Serena, and you can take us away for today's presentation.
Thank you, John, and thank you everyone who is joining this session today. So as John has introduced me, I'm a PhD candidate in anthropology at the University of Liverpool, and my PhD is framed within the research activity of Cleaner Africa that I'm sure some of you already know. So the presentation I will be giving today is about hopes and fears carried by a gas bottle. So as John was introducing, gas bottle will be here the main character of modern solution that may not or may not fit in the kitchen. And in particular, I will talk through the disenchantment that LPG brings in a Global South context, and specifically in Langas, which is a peri-urban setting of Kenya, where I conducted the ethnographic fieldwork for my PhD studies. So obviously this, before, let's say, entering the main story that I want to tell today, just as a frame of reference, this story is framed with the main discourses about clean energy transition and trying to find a modern solution away from polluting fuels in low-income countries, and how to really elaborate cooking devices and strategies that can upgrade domestic energy in a Global South setting. And in particular, my research wants to take an anthropological approach that is mainly informed by the knowledge that is being produced lately by the ever-expanding field of anthropology of energy, but also by STS, Society and Technology Studies, and by some knowledge in medical critical anthropology, to really produce a critical and fine-grained localized account of the intertwined relation between energy, users, technology, infrastructure, material arrangement, and the wider political economy. So really to try and unpack the complexity of what does it mean to harness energy in a localized context. So, as I was anticipating, my research was held in Langas, which is an informal settlement in the outskirts of the town of Eldoret. So Eldoret is the fifth biggest city of Kenya and is located in the Rift Valley. It's quite a strategic geographical position for exchange with Uganda, and is in the so-called triangle between Kisumu and Nakuru and Eldoret. And this has led along the years to a lot of people come into Eldoret for educational and especially professional, in search of professional opportunities. And that's why people of Langas like to say that Langas is a cosmopolitan setting. That along the last, I would say, 3 or 4 decades, really hosted mass of people coming from the rural area in their process of urbanization. Langas has gone through some very, let's say, remarkable transition, because it was a very rural area, and it was basically funded like an agricultural cooperative, but then it became a slum due to the congestion of people moving to the city, and is now slowly upgrading to the state of an estate, being embedded in the municipality of Eldoret. And basically the municipality is trying to solve the chronic lack of services and basic services like water and electrification that were missing in Langas, and that gained him the reputation of a slum. So we can say that nowadays Langas is a peri-urban setting, which gives him a kind of a liminal status between urban and rural, and this is particularly significant when looking at cooking practice, and it's now home of over 127,000 people. So these are some view of Langas that I took during my research. And going through my, let's say, methods, this is an anthropological study, and so the main part of data collection is held through ethnographic fieldwork. My ethnographic fieldwork happened between March and September 2021. I was lucky enough to be able to actually travel to Kenya despite the pandemic, but it wasn't like a jump in the field, because it was anticipated by a scoping visit that I had in January 2020, just before the pandemic started. And this was somehow essential to establish a relation with the community, to know the context, and especially to engage with the local authorities that were already particularly keen to the topic of clean energy transition, because of some project that the research group was holding there. Amongst this authority, the CHV, the community health volunteers, were essential figures to guide me through the community and potentially scope out where I would have decided to do my research. The community health volunteers are basically volunteers, and they are part of the community. They are elected to represent the health need of a community and to report their needs to the higher level of the, let's say, of the public health ladder. And amongst them, I had a link with one of them, which is Collins, which would then become my local field assistant during my fieldwork. So let's say this scoping visit kind of paved the way for me to access Langas. And when I went in 2021 to do my ethnographic fieldwork, I was already supported by Collins and by Nancy, that was also engaged into this public health system. And thanks to them, I can say that it came out a very interesting collaborative research, because they weren't only field assistant or translator, but they really helped me in elaborating, let's say, the conceptual framework of my research. So obviously, when we talk about ethnographic research methods, we think about being on the field and do a deep immersion in the context, and to do participant observation. And obviously, being able to travel allowed me to do what can now be defined a form of traditional ethnography that is not remote, but really the anthropologist is on the field. So in the first few months, we basically try to access the community and to immerse ourselves through some informal interviews that we would have with people that we would meet in the street, like street food vendors or commercial cooks, or thanks to the link with some local organization, we had some focus group discussion with, for example, the CHVs, but also with the members of the chamas, who are these chamas are these groups of women that gather to like a saving group to save money and as a form of female empowerment in the community. And this helped us to pave out some occasion to develop some more, some stronger relation with some of these people that would become then our participant. And when this relation of trust were established, we started doing household visits and narrative interview with our participants. Let's say that because the research was mainly revolving around cooking practice, our activity were mainly to do with cooking and cooking interview, let's say. So a wide form of knowledge was transferred to us from the participants while we were preparing food. So let's say that it was a very multisensorial experience, I would say, or as we like to say in anthropology, it was a full embodiment where it wasn't only about collecting words and information or only seeing, but really experiencing with all the body. So it was an essential component was represented by tasting and smelling and really living in the community and trying to understand how these energy practices are shaped and how users and local people relate to them. So this was, let's say, introduction to my research, and just to explain a bit the research method I used and to give a frame of reference. Obviously, during these 6 months, I collected a lot of ethnographic data, and there are lots of stories to tell. But the one I decided to tell today is indeed about the hopes and the fears that are carried by a gas bottle. So, just as a frame of reference that gives an idea of the situation of domestic energy in Kenya, there are still only 13% of the population using clean fuels for domestic energy needs, and more than 23,000 deaths per year are related to household air pollution. This has obviously a massive burden both in health and environmental terms, and the government, especially in the last decades, really invest to try and promote clean energy transition in the country, both implementing policies and making substantial infrastructural and developmental program to sustain the transition away from polluting fuels and to clean fuels. And the clean fuel that was mainly fostered in Kenya is represented by LPG. So nowadays, from the last census, firewood is still the most common fuel used mainly in rural area, but LPG has gone to be the second most used fuel to the almost 25%. So LPG gas cylinders have been transiting, thanks to these policies and this intervention, from being a luxurious item that only the upper class and the rich family could afford, to an everyday consumable that is really common to find also in deprived area like Langas. And obviously, LPG is presented both by the government, but also by the development narrative as a clean energy that is easy to scale up because it's easy to move thanks to very small and sturdy bottles, and is easy to use. It doesn't need massive skills to harness the energy, and is a modern solution that can be very impacting very well both in terms of health and environment. However, we know through lots of study that people still struggle to fully transit to LPG, and if in some other global south context a full transition was possible, this is still not the case for Kenya, where people keep fuel stacking and so use LPG aside with more traditional stoves and fuels. Anyway, apart from, let's say, this official narrative, the anthropological study that we conducted was mainly interested with really thinking, what does LPG represent for local people and not only for the government or the international body that where fostering is used. And that's how we came to realize that there are a set of promises, hopes, expectation, but also fears, disillusion associated with owning a gas cylinder. And often these feelings associated with the gas cylinders are not linked to the technical purpose that a gas cylinder is meant to deliver. So it has nothing to do with is the gas cylinder able to fulfill the purpose of cooking in a certain way, but they are often associated with other socio-cultural and economic or housing components that really play a role in determining how people perceive a gas bottle. So I will take you now through some of these promises first, and then through some of the fears, through some of the words that I've been collecting in Langas during my research. And so I will use the words of my participants to better express how a gas bottle is perceived in Langas. So firstly, and this is probably the most intuitive, LPG delivered the promise of health, of a better health. And this was something that Anne was saying as she was suffering from asthma, and she said, asthma runs in my family. I had it when I was young, and my sister has it as well. My mom always used to cook with gas, and we couldn't really afford it because it was expensive. I remember my mom was always arguing with dad about it. Now everyone can have a gas. My daughter, she also has asthma. Using the jiko, it will be like murdering her. So the jiko, for who's not familiar to the Kenyan context, is this stove that you can see in the image, and is basically a metallic stove that is fueled by charcoal, and that we can see from the image emits lots of smoke. Is often also associated with releasing carbon monoxide, and people are generally very careful about its use, although in Langas it was, I would say, the primary cook stove. So obviously the LPG promise a better health and less exposure to pollutant substance. And it also promise freedom. This is also quite intuitive. Freedom from drudgery and from laborious household activity that are often gendered. So in a context like Langas and Kenya, I would say, kitchen activity are mainly a prerogative of women. So due to some, say, cultural reason, kitchen activity has always been disregarded as dirty and dangerous and polluting, and so only women had to deal with food and with the activity that happened in the kitchen. And this has led to women only being in charge of cooking. This has not really changed when people started moving to urban area. And as in the words of Mary, the activity of setting up the jiko, this stove, this charcoal stove that I was showing you before, is really laborious, and it takes away a lot of time. She has to wake up in the morning, light the jiko, make tea, then cool down the jiko to save some charcoal. After a few hours, light the jiko again to prepare ugali or chapati or gideri for the day. These are some of the traditional staple food. Then, when I'm done, I boil some water with the remains of the charcoal, but in the evening, I have to light the jiko up again and just to rewarm. It's such a waste. I'm swearing at matchboxes all day. With the gas, zack, you turn the burner on and the food is already boiling. So obviously the promise of having more time to invest potentially also in empowering activity like educational activity or professional activity. And then definitely there is the promise of gender equality, because as I was giving you this, let's say, gender context, before about kitchen activity being only for women, lots of our participants and lots of women thought that if they could have a gas stove, their husbands would be much more engaged in cooking activity, while, as Marie was telling us, my husband never cooks. He would never get his hands dirty with charcoal. He thinks that the black is permanent, and she was laughing. But if we had a gas, then yes, I think he would help. So the cleanliness of a gas stove is not only about the emission that are not like the one of the jiko, but it's only also about not getting their hands dirty and to keep clean while cooking. And surely the promise of modernity. So now I'm kind of drifting away from the more intuitive promises to more like immaterial and intangible expectations that are posed on the gas bottle. So Kennedy, for example, was telling us that he doesn't cook, and to be fair, I can't stand the food cooked with gas. It smells differently and it tastes insignificant, but I would love to have a gas bottle. I wish I could just go back one evening and tell my wife, look, we have a cylinder, we can live the digital life. So the gas cylinder comes to epitomize something and is basically the ability to transit to modernity and to be able to access something innovative, something new. And it really becomes like a status symbol that is not really important if it works or if it doesn't work, but it's just about owning it despite its functionality. So Joshua was telling us, do you know how many people have a gas bottle but they leave it empty in the corner of the room? They want it like this, empty. It doesn't contain any gas. It doesn't even have a burner. People use gas as a piece of furniture, as a very well visible ornament. I'm pretty sure all of them choose the brand depending on the color. They don't care it to be trustable. They just want it to be shiny. So again, a promise that is not really associated with what a gas bottle is designed for. And the status symbol comes also to represent a social desirable object. So if you have a gas cylinder, you are more socially desirable in many occasions. This was summarized with the word of Gregory, that it said, if you use a gas bottle, you are immediately cool. It means that you know what you are doing, that you have gone to school. A gas bottle is not for everyone, it's for someone. If you are that one, you are great. When I mean socially desirable, it's not only about being cool, but it has real, practical, and I would say very material consequences. Because, for example, one of our participants was telling us that if she would have a gas bottle, it would be easier for her to find a job, because she was telling us about a situation in which she applied for a job and the boss didn't want her because he asked her if she had a gas cylinder and she said no. And so he thought that she would always be late in the morning, because if she had only the charcoal jiko, she would have to prepare breakfast, and basically he perceived her as unreliable because she was still anchored to these traditional inefficient methods. But also from a housing perspective, a lot of landlords don't want to rent their units to people that are using charcoal or other polluting fuels. They want them to use the gas in most of the cases, and that's because they obviously they don't blacken the walls, so there is no smoke, so the structure keeps clean, and it's basically more desirable. So these were some of the promises that LPG gas bottle delivers, and some anthropological literature would say that gas bottles are very enchanting, or that they are gifted with charm. But living in the community really taught us that there is another layer behind this enchantment, and is the other side of the coin, the disenchantment that LPG gas bottle brings. So basically questioning, let's say, investigating this disenchantment is not about finding ways or criticism toward the gas bottle itself, but is trying to understand what are the dilemmas for local people on fully transit to gas cylinder, because often the epidemiological international narrative present gas bottle as magic bullets, as undisputable good that are only going to do well and to have a positive impact on the community. But the community were returning a different degree of analysis and complexity. So first of all, people were fearing explosion, and this we know as a very common thing, that they are scared that the gas bottle will explode. And this is at the other side of the coin in this housing arrangement that I was presenting before. So if the landlord would prefer their tenants to use gas bottle, the tenants would actually fear using the gas bottle in a rental unit, because they think that if it would explode, then they will have to pay all the neighbors and repay the landlord. But also they fear parasite refillers. So this needs a bit of background, but basically the LPG market in Kenya has often been undermined by parasite illegal activities in which basically unlicensed LPG dealers were refilling gas bottle, but they weren't allowed to do so, basically stealing gas bottle from branded company, and this created a very a strong narrative about LPG being unreliable that is only starting fading now, when the government has really helped in trying to build up the LPG reputation. But in context like Langas, that is very deprived and where microcriminality and illegal activity are quite ordinary, it seems that the threat of parasite refillers is still there, and it still really impact on the perception of people. So someone was telling me that if a seal for a gas cylinder is fake, it's very easy to remove, and so people want it to be really hard to remove because it's a guarantee that this will be refilled properly. Or they were telling me that if the gas is not purely blue, but it has some lumps of yellow and it smokes, then it's blended with other substances, and still it's like a victim of these parasite refillers. Obviously, this is not about trying to understand what is true or what is false, what is myths and what is facts, but is about trying to understand what is this kind of narrative telling us about how LPG gas bottles are perceived and signified in Langas. And when I was telling before that these promises and this disenchantment was related not only to the functionality of a gas bottle, but also to some socio-cultural arrangement, I was referring, for example, to the ways in which modern solutions relate to traditional practices, because a lot of our participants were skeptical about fully transit to LPG because they thought they would lose their traditional practices. And it's easy for us to think that these traditional practices are just a rudimentary and inefficient way of cooking that they should really abandon, but in reality they hold a lot of cultural and symbolic and social value that people in a context like Langas are not ready to give up, often because the way they cook in a traditional way links them back to the rural place where they are from, and it becomes like, it comes to represent a link with their place of origin. So, for example, Mildred was telling us how she teach her daughter how to set up the fire and how to light the jiko. She must know, even if she would only use gas in her life, it's our tradition, it's our way of cooking, and it is what a man expects in a good wife. And it is a life skill, because life may change and you never know what may be available in 5 years' time. To preserve the tradition, this is the key. Not just to listen to what some muzungus, which is the term, also kind of derogatory term with which white people are indicated. Not only to listen to what some muzungus says. We cannot just forget and use all this technology from the West. So this was really like playing a role in the disillusion toward LPG. And in general, LPG was seen as creating new social divisions and profound fracture within the community. And this was mainly due to the fact that people have different and unequal access to LPG. I'm referring to different situations, but for example, these fractures separate age groups, working groups, and especially people in the rural and in the urban area. We are prone to think that young people are more up to adapt modern technology than older generation, which are not really ready to switch their habits to cook with modern technology. That's definitely true. But for example, Claire was telling us, Claire was like in her 20s, and she said, gas is for old mamas. You don't dare touching it. We are young, we can cope with the dirt, but old mamas can't. My brother would chase me with a stick if he finds out I'm using mom's cylinders to cook. So again, this is quite counterintuitive and really kind of underline the complexity of these social dynamics. We would think young generation use gas, but in reality what I found in Langas is that old mamas, so housewife over a certain age, usually over 50, were more entitled to use gas than young generation because of the health effects. But also some working groups are accessing gas because they need to be quick in cooking because of their work, against like housewives that maybe they just have to fulfill household chore and they can just keep cooking with the traditional stove. But also and especially the division between rural and urban area, because rural area of Kenya still are very far from the distribution network for LPG, and so it creates this fracture for between people that, for example, goes back from Langas, go back to their rural place, and they don't know how to cook anymore in a traditional way, and in the same time, rural people would like to scale up, but they don't have access to LPG. And this is really kind of complex at the social level and brings up a lot of layers that are not immediately intuitive. And this fact that there is unequal access to LPG for a lot of factors, so we said economic factors some people can afford, but also infrastructural factor like rural versus urban, creates a new form of marginalization where people who don't use the LPG are marginalized, as the case I was telling you before about Sharon, that she was refused as an employee because she didn't have a a LPG gas bottle, or some tenants that are kicked out of their residential units because they cannot afford to switch to LPG. But for example, Tina was telling us, so Tina was the secretary of one of these chamas, so these saving groups that are mainly including women. And she was the secretary, and she was very proud of this role. But then she said that one day the secretary, substitute, came in and said that we had to vote something. Okay, I said, what's that something? Because I'm the chair and I need to know. And she replied, we need a new chair. We cannot come here and struggle to have a cup of tea because you are still lighting the Gico. We need it fast to proceed with the affairs. We need someone who can serve us with a MECO. So MECO is the local term to refer to a LPG gas cylinder. Tina said, I don't have a MECO, and I never thought it was a problem until that day. So Tina, that was really proud of her role as a chair of the Chama, found out that not having a LPG gas cylinder was really exclusive and excluding her, and basically she was victim of this new form of marginalization that probably ran along the line of status symbol and being socially desirable, that were some of the promises that the LPG gas cylinder deliver. So basically, I raised a lot of points and probably a bit like unsettling, but the aims of anthropology is really to try and unpack the complexity of social and cultural ground and context. And what emerged is that LPG is a very ambivalent technology that brings hopes, but it also brings fears, and is basically challenging this idea that LPG is a magic bullet that we can implement in whatever context, because every specific context has some form of resistance that are interfering in its implementation. And it has pro and it has cons, but is only, in a way, only partially appropriate. Maybe it's appropriate from a health point of view or from an economic point of view, but a lot of people think it's not appropriate from a socio-cultural point of view. And we think that we can easily go over socio-cultural resistance in favor of health and progress, but local community would argue against this. So these are just some reference that help me conceptualize around this story. So the promising of infrastructure and the anthropology of an ambivalent technology, and the enchantment of infrastructure that is really also a disenchantment. So I will end here, and thank you for your attention. I hope it was clear.
Thank you, Serena. That was fascinating. I really enjoyed that. I think I've got a bit of echo there. That's better. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. It's a topic that, as you know, is very close to my heart, having got married just the end of last year in Eldoret. And I totally understand the value of the deep immersion in the context and the embodiment in the cooking space, having spent a lot of time sitting with my grandmother-in-law in her rural kitchen, looking at how people are cooking with firewood. And despite the fact that there's a LPG cylinder bought by uncles-in-law, and there's a EPC that we've bought sat in the kitchen, they're still not used for all of the cooking. Firewood is still the daily norm, and just really trying to understand the complexities, the reasons why that is. It's the kind of thing you can really only do by spending that time there. I've never been able to detail that and analyze it in the same depth as you have, so I really appreciate the presentation that you've given today, that have given us a lot more insight. I see a couple of comments have come in from on the chat. I'd like to remind people that it is there. So if you have any questions for Serena, we do have 20 minutes now where we can engage in debate. I think there's a couple of congratulations on there, or 3 congratulations, and a comment from Dan Pope saying that it's very interesting and perhaps contradictory the observation that you made that gas being for old mamas and for health and cleanliness, and the young people being able to cope with the smoke and dirt, which I guess goes against some of our conventional wisdom. Any more comments for anyone that would like to perhaps unmute and ask a comment directly? I'll pause for a second here in case anyone would like to.
Hi everyone. Hi Serena, this is Matt. Hi, yeah, your presentation was fascinating. Thanks, Serena, it was great. I just had a question because, you know, I'm working on the quantitative side in Langas, and I thought, I guess something maybe similar where it's more along the lines of maybe just out of respect or protecting the health of the elderly. So, for example, I found that because we've been talking about like the value-added tax that was added on LPG in Kenya, and then also just in the context of COVID-19 restrictions there, that I guess older aged women suffered more in terms of food security due to like the COVID-19 restrictions and the value-added tax. Like they were less able to cope, probably because they may rely on others to obtain their food, or, you know, they may not be able to find other methods if they have to, you know, have these different coping strategies, whereas younger people are more able. So I wonder if it's more along the lines that maybe the young aspire to use LPG, as you said, but it's kind of out of just respect or acknowledge that, you know, the older age may need more help or be more susceptible to different health conditions. And so they're kind of using this as a way to kind of protect them. Because I found that in some of the survey work that I worked on, that they were saying, you know, that they rely on maybe their children or, you know, their nephews to kind of gather food for them, especially with restrictions. And so if they lose that because of, you know, stay-at-home orders or prices are too high, that they actually experience a greater, I guess, disadvantage. Like, and that was in terms of food security, but I think it can maybe also be a similar theme here where I guess the younger people are saying, okay, well, you're better off, so you need to figure out how to deal with it, and we need to help the elderly more, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I agree with what you said, and maybe this was not explained well from that quote that I put, but basically Claire was the daughter, and she said, my brother will beat me if he finds me using the gas that is for the old mama. And this is because exactly like the young generation feels like they have to support their parents or grandparents, and the gift of a MECO, of a gas cylinder, was really a symbol of their gratitude, and you know, they made the sacrifice of taking them to a city, make them study, and now it was a way also to pay back. But yeah, definitely, I think, as you said, Matt, like there is also a food security component on that, and definitely older generation, especially in peri-urban setting where they're not really employable, as it's much stronger. So yeah, I agree. And yeah, I saw there are 2 questions from Tash, so maybe I could pick up on them. John, what do you think?
Yeah, sorry, I actually hadn't noticed that Tash had asked questions. It's cut off at the bottom, but now I see there see more. So yes, please do go for those. Yeah,
so the first one is about the social status associated with LPG, which is more about owning the equipment rather than using it. And she was asking if I have an idea of why this is, and if I have encountered similar attitude toward other devices or appliances. Yeah, I think yes, not exclusively toward the modern technology. For example, a lot of old mamas would still have like a fireplace and often a cep-kube, that is basically a clay oven that is a permanent feature of the house, basically like a stove that is fueled by firewood. They would still build it and have it in Langas despite they weren't using it, and they wanted to show their friends they had one, despite they wouldn't use it because firewood is to be purchased and is expensive, and then it releases a lot of smoke, and they live in congested places, so really firewood is no. but they were still really concerned with owning one, despite it wasn't functional. And another thing was like the electricity token. So basically, electricity in Langas and a lot of Kenyan context now is delivered through this token system. So basically, people pay through mobile money for the electricity, and they use it. They use as much as they have paid, so they pay in advance instead of waiting for the bill at the end of the month. And a lot of people were really proud of having this token system installed in their house, although their use of electricity was really minimal, and often these devices were just there on the wall, but they were not actually connected to Kenya Power to fulfill that technical purpose. So I suppose I don't have a reply of why this is. I suppose it has a lot to do with kind of device that symbolize a transition to modern life, and people invest a lot of emotional and symbolical attachment to them, and they want to own them because they represent so, but they're not really functional, and the same to kind of being anchored to their tradition and to the cultural heritage. So I hope I was comprehensive. And the second was about how did the LPG becoming more expensive impact on the enchantment, disenchantment. Yes, so the Kenyan government put a zero VAT rating in 2016 over the refill of LPG to try and encourage people to use gas. But this 16% VAT was reimposed on the 1st of July 2021. So basically the price of gas increased of 16%. And this was really impacting on the enchantment of gas, because as I was discussing with Elizabeth, that I think is also amongst the participants, gas really dropped its price in Kenya in the last 10 years. So before it was a luxurious item that only rich people could access. And then thanks to these government policies, it became affordable for everyone. And no one could believe that for once the price of a basic good was decreasing, and everyone was enchanted by this and happy. And obviously we saw an increase in the adoption of LPG. But when this tax was reimposed in July and I was there, people were really disappointed, and yeah, they felt like it was a step back, and they would go around all the retailers asking for their price, often unable to understand that it wasn't the retailer fault, but it was like from external arrangement. And I suppose like the LPG retailer has a very active role in trying to re-enchant by making it evident that it's still like good to adopt LPG, but try to bring up that these are structural constraints that don't connect with them. So yeah, I don't know if that was clear.
I see a couple more questions have come in here. There's one from Elizabeth. So she's asking about whether you encountered situations where households were not allowed to use LPG unless the employer is present. So sorry, house helps is what I meant to say.
Well, not really, because I haven't seen many house helps in Langas. Langas is a very poor, I would say, deprived area. So rich family who could probably afford a house help don't live there. So I think that was a very contextual feature that no, I didn't have occasion to encounter.
It is definitely something that I've seen with LPG and with electricity as well in higher income households, where people are afraid that their house helps may not understand how to use the gadgets properly and may not use them efficiently, and may end up running up higher bills, or may damage the gadgets, or may cause some kind of safety risk. What I thought was interesting that I didn't realize before was around the role of landlords as enablers, in particular for using modern energy in the kitchen. I think in our research on electricity in particular, then we've often seen landlords as disablers, where in low-income neighborhoods, then landlords have a single meter for their house, and then their tenants use that meter, and any additional consumption is at the landlord's cost. But it seems the opposite is true of LPG, where landlords are really emphasizing the cleanliness and the kind of benefits to keeping the property clean and the safety.
Yeah.
So we've got another question coming from Shukri here. So Shukri is making a comparison to the LPG transition in India, and she's saying she remembers reading about the same kind of developments when LPG was introduced there. And if LPG has become a prestigious good, then how could this be leveraged to increase the uptake, especially amongst the younger generation?
Well, I don't really have a reply for this, but my observation were that, like, you know, how Joshua, the gas retailer, was saying people don't choose the gas cylinder based on the brand or how trustable or how, but just as how shiny it is. And I suppose, like, so basically it was making, like, depends which color it is. And there is a real fascination in Kenya because there are so many marketers now. I don't remember how many, but more than 30 marketers of LPG, and every one of them has a different color, and there is all this kind of symbolic attachment to the color and to the reputation. What I've been seeing about being a prestige good, and I think this was also the thought of the government when they removed the VAT on the refill, was like, okay, you have to pay 65 brands. Thank you, Elizabeth. So the idea of the government was to remove the VAT on the refill of LPG, so to make refill very cheap. People, though, still need to pay the deposit to own a gas cylinder, which is a kind of not really a ownership, right? Because it's like a deposit paid to the gas company to take the gas cylinder on with them. And I suppose, like, that kind of scale up the idea, like, if I buy a gas cylinder, then I can refill it very cheaply, and everyone wanted a gas cylinder because it was kind of a novelty or whatever. But at the same time, I think, like, when the VAT was going to be reintroduced in July, in June, we could really see a lot of brands making crazy offers for the equipment. So kind of the opposite, the Gillette effect or the printer effect, like the gas bottle itself was really cheap, like when you buy a printer, and then though you have to buy the ink because the refill was becoming expensive again. So I don't know, yeah, I think, like, it's a bit of marketing behind these dynamics that I don't really have the ability to comment, but yeah, I suppose marketing is leveraging on this idea of prestige, and yeah, what does it represent to have a LPG?
So we have a question that's coming from Simon. He's wanting to ask specifically around your anthropological observations on the community. Then he wants to know about how social media is handled and how that ranks as a medium of influence compared to parents in younger people. Is he maybe it's referring to parents compared to younger people, or older people compared to younger people? Simon, do you want to just clarify that last bit?
Sorry, I meant as comparable in influence. You know, we have the situation where social media in UK is probably equal or more influential than the majority of parents. I don't know if that's true, but anyway, I just wondered about observations, and also whether you saw that they're still they do use Instagram or Facebook or nothing. Just observations on social media and how influential it is.
Do you refer, like, when you say influential on energy practices, or influential just at the level of society?
Influential on younger people, and I put in the question sort of 20-year-olds, yeah, in society, in that community.
Yeah, well, I would say maybe exactly as you said, like now, for example, Facebook in Western countries a bit for like older generation and Instagram like for younger. I think Instagram has not really permeated that much in Kenya yet. It's more about Facebook and still is mostly for young people. So I suppose there is also kind of, again, a rural-urban divide there because a lot of rural contexts have very poor connection, or they have like mobile provider that are a bit like unreliable, and so for sure I think there is a kind of rural-urban and yeah, you know, if the young generation go to study in a town like Eldoret, they're more exposed to innovations and social media, and they take them back to the parents. But talking about social media, you made me think about an episode of one of my participants, one of these retailers, that was one day we went to visit him, and he has all his LPG gas bottle piled up in a very scenographic way, and he was really upset because he said someone was taking picture of himself close to his business with all the cylinders, and then he posted those on Facebook pretending it was his business. So again, it's about like yeah, social prestige, but also kind of building up a narrative that in the social media is very easily spreadable, so everyone would think you are owning that business even if it's not true, while in real life this would not happen. So yeah, I don't know, maybe I drifted up around a bit there and not sure it's completely pertinent.
Simon, did you want to respond at all?
No, that was very helpful. Thank you. Yeah, I gave a thumbs up, but you obviously didn't see it, John. Okay, cool. Thanks. Yeah, excellent session. Just while I'm on unmuted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're at the end of our time now. There's one final note that's just gone into the chat from Arthur saying that in Kenya, Twitter and Instagram are the most used platforms in urban centres. Facebook is more rural. Also in the chat, I've put a link to the Field Methods playlist on YouTube, so you can catch up with any of this session and any of the previous sessions you may have missed. We don't yet have a topic for our next session in 2 weeks' time, so if anyone has an idea of something they would like to share themselves, or would like to host one of the partners that they're working with as well, please do get in touch with me. Please make sure you use my Gamos email address now, not my Loughborough one, which sadly no longer exists. So I'll also put that in the chat. And then before we close, I would like to give the final words to our presenter today, Serena. Is there anything you would like to say just to round off what has been a very enjoyable and engaging session today?
Thank you. I think that was very good, and I'm happy that many questions were raised, and also that I could engage in a public that was not necessarily ethnographic or anthropological oriented. So yeah, that was a wonderful occasion, and I'm happy that it was clear enough and engaging.
Fantastic, thank you. And you did mention that there are other stories that are coming out of your research. So as those begin to clarify, I hope you'll get back in touch and you'll be willing to share those with us as well. So thank you once again. We really enjoyed having you today. Thank you to all of the audience who attended and participated, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.